What that essentially means, and this is a theme that the Meir Shiloh, Beis Yaakov, and the Sod Yesharim, all three of these generations of Ishbitz will teach, is that halacha is about not just saying no, but saying no. It's about decreasing your pleasure of this world to some degree. Yes, it's about boundaries. It is about boundaries. It's about savlanut, is a word he likes to use a lot in the Sod Yesharim, very, very much used. It's about learning to have patience, not to always enjoy what you can have this second, but wait for the right time. Even though Yosef and his creation were great, but not forever. The concept of an everlasting edifice in terms of Jewish leadership and Jewish kingdomhood is not to be to Joseph and his ilk and his methodology of living, rather that's to Judah. Even though during the 6,000 years of creation, before the Messianic advent of the Messianic time, he affected, because of his righteousness, that his seed and his derech, we're not talking about just his biological seed, we're talking about his way of being, should it be sustained, should be have a foothold and be powerful. The concept of something that will be really eternal, that's connected to Judah. Yosef, because of course you have to see, these are prototypes. These are archetypal representations that Yehuda and Yosef are. So we look at them and we look at all of history. We're not concerned with the history of Yehuda and Yosef at that moment. We're looking at a snapshot that tells us a story of before and after and during. So Yosef is really upset. My brother Yehuda, he all of his escapades, whatever he does, he's always a success. Look at this guy, King David, and look at King David. He does this, he does that. I mean, again, don't worry about the history here. It's all one. We're not worried about this. That Bathsheba and this. He makes Clinton look like a priest, like a saint, and yet King David Melch Yisro, Chai V'Kayim, and Yehuda and Tamar, all of these stories, and yet Yehuda, Yehuda's the great, he's the king.
Can't do no wrong.
Exactly. And Yosef, it's like he mentions one time to the butler, please remember me to Pharaoh and appreciate it. So, okay, no, he's punished. Stay 2 more years. What's wrong with that? I never heard people start telling me it's wrong to I'm like, no, there's nothing wrong. Yosef was on some level. Obviously, he was on some level. He couldn't do anything right. He was being punished for things So that Yosef was upset. God is judging me and being strict with me down to the hair, the hair's breadth. If I'm over a hair's breadth, boom, I get slapped. God said, listen, I'm going to show you there are different ways of being for different people. He showed him the story that the baker and the butler came to jail, right? Every king has 2 sarim. You know what a sar is? It's interesting if you... Minister. It's so funny because we think of what's the big deal? A butler. No, it's no big deal. I was in the Egypt exhibit in the Met on Sunday. They have a mini tome, like a mini, what do you call it? Replica. It's not so small. A couple stories high, of a pyramid. And who is it? It's of the chief, whatever, to the king. In other words, if you were Oh, he was the guy who put the crown on the king and he cloaked the king. This guy was very, very powerful and very, very wealthy. Any of these things is essentially you're in the cabinet of the king. Those were symbolic things that gave you power, gave you access to the king and access to a whole lot of things. So every king needs to have these two people to be of their service, not just literally to make them bread. There's much more than that. So it's funny because like when you read this story, you're saying it was just a baker, it was just a butler. Even historically, there weren't just a baker or the butler. The person who put the cup in Pharaoh's hands, it was a powerful position. So if that's what we're saying physically was the situation, spiritually also we're going to say these are representations, are again archetypes of a very, very important figures in life. What are they? So he says, so what were they? Well, let's go through the story according to the way the Meshloach interprets it. The Sar HaMashke, the wine pour, so the story is that he came and he served Pharaoh his wine, and there was a cup of wine that has a fly in it. But Meshloach says he shouldn't be punished. Why not? What could he have done already? Because a fly is alive. He can't guard it. At this very millisecond, as he puts the cup into Pharaoh's hands, because of that moment, the fly closes. On the other hand, the baker, he served the king bread with a pebble in it. He's obviously guilty. How did it get in? That he didn't, make sure that the first the grain and then the flour and then the dough wasn't free of anything. You have to be careful. He wasn't careful, so he's guilty. It's not a living thing. A pebble can't jump. Although it can actually fall from the ceiling, but still. What he was really seeing, like the Baal Shem Tov, by the way, says, if you see something, don't say something. If you see something, it's telling you something about yourself. You don't see anything, according to the Baal Shem Tov, unless there's a lesson. So the same thing here. It's not just that this is a story of how Yosef got from being in bondage in this dungeon to become the viceroy of Egypt, but it's actually a very important lesson these two people are teaching him. This is what they taught him. That he is Negetzar Ofen, that really he is the equivalent of the baker. And we're going to learn a text on what that means in terms of that. To be a Jew in the Yosef tradition is particularly about keeping halacha and defining yourself in the halachic model, as opposed to how non-Jews don't observe halacha. At least Esav, the level of Esav doesn't have to observe halacha. It doesn't. And we'll see, the Meshloach has amazing teaching on that. Actually, the Sod Yesharim has it. What's his place? He has to make sure everything is clean. Esav is the person who's not so careful. In other words, there's this person who's going to make trouble for you, and you're going to try to serve the king, but he's going to try to do something that's going to upset the king, and it's your job to make sure he doesn't. In order that Esav shouldn't have a place to be able to complain. Hemid is Yosef Nagdo Menuka Mikol. Yosef was his counterbalance, and Yosef represents somebody who's really worked on himself and pure. It says about Yosef, he's like the spark that goes out against Esav. Therefore, he was given strength. This is another thing about Yosef. Yehuda doesn't have enough self-control. Yosef is given a lot of self-control.